Michael gave me permission to introduce you. So,
Okay.
good afternoon, friends and newcomers, to our Friday special conversations with special people. Well, there's no one more special. You are wonderful. I'm so happy to introduce our very special guest, Rosann Bar. And anyone who has ever been here and who has heard her or seen her give lectures at the library since January 31st, 2001, considers her a great friend and a great speaker. And Rosann, you first spoke on the topic cultural diversity when you were a professor of sociology at Caldwell College. Now Rosann is the Dean of Business and Social Sciences at Ocean County College. Despite her busy schedule, Rosann has driven up here from Toms River and spoken here twice every year since 2001, with the exception of last year's Mother's Day program due to the pandemic. And she always brought flowers for everyone.
I miss that.
I miss it too. See?
Next time we meet, even if it's not Mother's Day, I'll bring
And
it.
you remember eating the cookies and we never worried about who was touching any cookies or
I know, now everything's single serve. You're gonna have to put
Single
one cookie in a
serve.
bag.
Right. You not only brought us beautiful flowers, you brought us wonderful topics for all of those in the audience, and we learned so much from you. And I could just tell you one thing that you taught me. You were talking about, you taught me a lot, but Richard, I always tell the story of how to hurt someone the most was how Richard Nixon's mother looked through him when she didn't like what he did. She made believe he didn't exist.
That's the worst punishment that you
What?
could do to somebody. Shunning is the worst punishment you could do to anybody.
I know, and I never forgot that. I always think of that. See how we pass along information that has no value.
It's just
Not
for
Richard.
enjoyment.
Right. Richard Nixon's starting to look good. That's even worse, but that's beside in any case, we look forward to next year when you come, and it gives me a chance to give you the flowers and a great big hug. But meanwhile, today, in honor of Mother's Day, we'll think about something that I thought of the topic, and when I said it to you, normally you give the topic, and it's rating a good mother from a bad mother. And I can't wait to hear it. So please, let's give a very warm welcome to our dear friend and guest lecturer, Rosann Bar.
Thank you all. I always love to come and join you for these talks, and I do so miss seeing you in person and getting to see everybody and chit chat before. So I really look forward to it, and hopefully keep our fingers crossed. The day is coming sooner than later, so that would be very exciting. Usually I do pick the topic, but today Phyllis did pick a topic, and I have to tell you, it's a tough one. Okay, it's a tough one to rate good mothers from bad mothers. And so hopefully before the end of this talk, you realize why it's a tough topic, but I'll do my best. So let me start with saying, first of all, that we do rate people. We are very, very judgmental in general, okay? There's research done, and I just want to read you this quote here. So we are what researchers Willis and Todorov call cognitive misers. All right, so what does that mean? It means we make up our minds about any given person or act, guess how long? Less than 1/10 of a second. And even less when it comes to matters that don't affect us personally. Okay, so we judge people, we're quick to judge people, and it's just part of who we are. It's part of in some ways, how we're all hardwired. So given that we're so judgmental, it shouldn't be shocking that we're always thinking, well, how can we rate mothers in particular? Because they have such an important job in society. So just so you have an idea, there was an extensive study done of mothers with children up to the age of 5 across the entire United States. It was done by the Children's Hospital in Michigan. And they found that 2/3 of mothers had been criticized and felt that they had been criticized for their parenting decisions. So that meant up front, people were criticizing mothers for their decisions. And they said that the majority of them 61% of the criticisms came from people close to home. It came from grandparents. It came from husbands. It came from friends. It came from peers. It didn't really come from pediatricians. Only about 8% of healthcare workers were the ones showing criticism. So it's interesting that mothers are judged, clearly. 2/3 of mothers saying they feel very criticized. But interesting, the criticisms come from them, from the people closest to them. They were 3 times as likely to report being criticized within their family than from somebody outside their family. And the criticism started before they even had the baby. You should be getting off your feet. You better make sure you breastfeed. Ba, 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 ba. Criticisms, advice before the baby's even born. Okay, with, you know, especially if women pull up a drink and, you know, people saying, oh, that better not be liquor. So the criticisms start, they're fast and furious, and they tend to come from people within their home. I mean, there are exceptions. I could tell you when I had my first son, who now is a doctor himself, but when I had him, he was only 5 pounds, 14 ounces. He was a teeny, teeny thing. We used to call him E.T. because he had this long, scraggly neck and his head flopped and his head looked bigger than his neck. And it was interesting because I had a normal, you know, birth, but the nurse there was critical and she said, are you a smoker? Because your baby is so small, you know, and she started in on me about why he was so small, to the point that she gave me anxiety. And I finally said to the doctor, look, is everything okay with my son? I'm very worried about this. And he goes, you're fine. He says, you're a very small pelvic size. You'll never have a big baby. Don't even worry about it. You'll never have a 9-pounder. And your son is perfectly healthy. But right away, because he was under the average birth weight, you know, I was subject to criticism for something that really I didn't have control over, given that I didn't smoke, didn't drink, and all the things that are associated with low birth weight. So the opening remark I want to make is we are judgmental by nature, and we're going to explore why. There are a lot of reasons why we are judgmental, and parents seem to get the brunt of it, mothers in particular. Okay. So when you ask me, Phyllis, you know, rate good mothers and bad mothers, it's easy in some ways to rate very, very, very bad mothers. I mean, Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children in a bathtub. It's easy to rate somebody like that and look negatively upon that. I have this case of a woman who she was a prostitute in Saratoga Springs, and she snorted cocaine off her baby's stomach while she was breastfeeding. It's very easy when cases are very egregious to be able to rate somebody and say they're bad.
Right.
But it's very difficult to rate people just in terms of everyday life, right? So I'm going to give you a quick test right now. So you go in a supermarket and a kid's screaming and yelling, okay? Now listen, mother one, okay, softly talks to her child and says, come on now, Johnny, you know, be quiet, it's okay. Mother 2 turns around and smacks Johnny. Who do you rate badly? Who gets the bad rating?
The one who smacked.
The smack.
The smacker.
Smacker.
Okay. Well, that's true for many people, and many people, particularly in today's day and age where we are against corporal punishment and we see the negative effects of it. But let me ask you another question. How many of you were also get kind of annoyed when the kid doesn't shut up and he keeps screaming, that you wish they would do something more dramatic than say, Johnny, would you mind being quiet? All right, guilty, right? We're all guilty of that. Very, very interesting. How many of us were ever smacked when we were a child? Okay. So it's a very, very interesting dynamic, because which is the right answer really depends on the culture you're a part of, your family experience, you know, and just other social contexts that happen wherein this behavior is. And the reason for that is that being a parent, and this has been analyzed sociologically, and particularly being a mother, because mothers are most often associated with parenting, and we're going to talk about gender in a minute. Um, there's no real good rules. Okay, what's a good parent? We don't know. What works on one child absolutely doesn't work on another child. I think I have 3 kids. That's certainly true in my house. My older son, we called him Spock. You could reason with him. You could just say, no, if you do this, the middle one was a bowl of emotions. No, you can't sit down and say, no, if you do that, it doesn't work. So even if we master the first child, we don't master the second, or maybe we master dealing with the second one. It's different than the first one. So what's the best way to parent? Even Dr. Spock, who gave all this advice to parents years ago, recanted and said, thanks to me, we raised a generation of brats. Okay? We don't have clear guidelines of what makes a good parent. We really don't. And yet, there's no room for error, right? Because we don't want to screw up with and have bad kids. And you can't quit being a parent. Think about that. It's not socially acceptable to say, you know what, I got into this parent thing, it ain't for me. We can't do that. So where people are in a role that nobody really knows the best way to do it, it works differently for different children. So even if you get it right with one kid, it may not work with others. There is constant judgment, not just by professionals, but by your peers. Okay? And there's really no traditional model of parenting that works across the board. You know,
Oh my
we
God.
also are expected to raise kids that are at better, more advanced than we are. So we always want our kids to what? Do better, be better. So there's a lot of pressure on people when it comes to parenting. Okay, and it is a one-way street. Think about this. We are legally obligated to care for our children, but granted, they shouldn't neglect us, but there's no legal requirement that your children have to, take care of you when you're older. Now, morally, they should, and hopefully they will, but legally, there's different boundaries as long as we're not neglecting them. So it's a very interesting thing. And every parent has total responsibility for their children, right? We're supposed to know everything about our kids. We're supposed to help them with everything, right? Whereas when you work, your responsibility is just, in terms of somebody's work. I don't evaluate my faculty on what they do outside of work. I only evaluate them based on what they do at work. But parenting, you're evaluated based on everything your child does, whether he's in school, whether he's with his friends. See how complicated this is? It's a very difficult role. And also, there's no formal training. Think about it. You need to get a fishing license. You need to get a driving license. But you can have a kid and no one really trains you. Yes, if you do Lamaze and you take that route, you'll get more training than not. But nobody really trains you. You get on the job training to take care of one of the most important possible people. Okay, so when you put all this together, right, and it's not a gradual role either. You have a baby and boom, you have a baby. It's not like you can ease your way into it. Once the baby's there, you have to feed it. You have to make sure it's okay. There's no gradual transitioning. And so for all of these reasons, and this is documented in a book called Parents in Contemporary America by LeMasters and Dufresne, the parenting role is the single most difficult role in our society because there's no clear guidelines. I know what's expected of me as a dean, right? My boss gives me a program plan and goals, so I know I just need to do this and I need to do that and I need to do this and I'll be successful. And I'll move up and I'll get my, my extra money. Okay. With parenting, we can't just check a box. It doesn't work that way. And so it really is a very difficult role. So then the question becomes, why are we judging parents and how do we judge parents? Well, I already told you at the beginning, we're very judgmental, but we're also judgmental different for men and for women. Just to give you an example, right? They did research about, what makes a good father and what makes a good mother. So they polled people, and based on the poll, here's what they said about a good father. A good father is characterized quite simply by his presence. He shows up in the delivery room, at dinner time, when he can. He shows up. He shows up to school recitals and ball games when it's reasonably possible. He's a good provider who is not above changing a diaper. He's a strong shoulder to cry on, and at the same time, a constant example of how to roll with the punches. Okay, essentially, what's a good father? Okay, and they sum it up, and I'll just read to you from this study. Being a good father is a reasonable, attainable goal. You need only be present and supportive. Okay? Well, what about a good mother? You ready? Okay. The single defining characteristic of iconic good motherhood is self-abnegation. What does that mean? Her children's needs come first. Their health and happiness are her primary concern. They occupy all her thoughts. Her day is constructed around them, and anything and everything she does is for their sake. Her own needs, ambitions, and desires are relevant only in relation to theirs. If a good mother takes care of herself, it is only to the extent that she doesn't hurt her children. As one of the polling samples put it, she is able to figure out how to carve out time for herself without detriment to her child's feelings of self-worth. So being a good mother, as defined by mothers themselves, is really impossible. All right, and I'll share with you what an attorney who works for Child Welfare Services had to say about it. Think about it for a moment. No one with any experience with children, or no one with any sense for that matter, believes that parenting can be done perfectly.
I'm listening to the library. My friend.
Are we okay? Okay.
Somebody's not muted.
Oh, okay. Parenting is the quintessential example of a Sisyphean task. You think it's tough when they're born, then they learn to walk. You finally figure out how to get them to nap, and then they're done with napping. How to handle tantrums with equanimity? Ask a saint. How to avoid passing on the neuroses that have been bequeathed down your family tree over generations? Ask a shrink. Then after years of honing your skills with children, you realize you haven't the slightest idea how to talk to the teenager living in your house. You can't get it right. We all know this. We all strive for greater excellence than we have any hope of achieving. Okay? Yet, we couple this knowledge with intolerance for the shortcomings of other parents. So all the research on mothering, parenting, to put it in one little nutshell, basically says it's an impossible task and we don't really know the best way to do it. So how can we then rate mothers? Well, obviously we're rating fathers and mothers a little differently. Fathers just need to show up and be supportive. Mothers, we're not really sure because they need to be everything and anything to their children. Otherwise, somehow they're not quite there. So it's a very difficult task. Compounding that is the fact that you have to negotiate, both parents have to negotiate with each other, right? You need to negotiate what they call in sociology a parenting style, right? Why? Parents in front of their children shouldn't be criticizing each other. They shouldn't be undoing what the other one did, because then what happens? The child learns, well, mommy said no, but I'll go ask daddy, okay? Which really creates a nightmare as a parent. And so all the research on parenting suggests you need to be consistent. So you need to, whatever it is you agree on, you need to be consistent. And I'll tell you a funny story. When my kids were little, I don't know what my boys did. My daughter wasn't born at the time, and I don't remember what it is they did. But my husband decided their punishment was going to be no fun food for a week. Okay, so given that my kids, they wanted to get over one, every day, and I agreed with them, even though I didn't know what the heck it meant. Every day, my sons would come up to me, Mommy, fruit snacks have this much percent juice. Does that make it nutritious or is it a fun food? And then I went through popcorn and I went through chocolate and and every day they'd come at me with, is this a fun food or can we consider that nutritious because blah, 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 blah. By the end of the week, I was ready to kill my husband. And I said to him, I don't care whatever punishment you give him in the future, but please be clear. Just say no chocolate, no popcorn, none of this no fun food, because I don't want to be the judge and jury all week while they're inventing all these creative ways just to stick it to me, because that's really what they were doing.
Oh my God.
Okay? But that's what makes parenting so hard. It's a difficult role. We're not sure what it even means. And then you got to agree with your spouse somehow to have a consistent way of being a parent. Otherwise, your child is going to be able to, research has shown it's detrimental, if parents aren't on the same wavelength. But it's not always easy to get there. And why then, so when you ask me to rate them, how is it that we could even think about rating people and parents? Well, it's clear when somebody's really evil, who murders their child or, is doing something egregious. It's not so clear in a lot of gray areas, and yet we do it anyway. And so the question is why? And there's been a lot of research on why we're judgmental. And just to give you some ideas about it, some people say we're hardwired that way, and it goes back to our earliest days of trying to survive, right? So when you have to survive, sometimes you have to sanction someone else. If you go back to the pre-human era, right? When we just became humans, we have to survive collectively. You need sometimes to tell some people, you shouldn't be doing that. Why? Because the group's survival depended on it. So being judgmental, many people argue, is a throwback to our need to survive. I need to sanction you so that you don't do something that can hurt the group. And so why would that make sense with mothering? Well, we don't want any harm to come to a child, right? So in some ways, we feel we need to be judgmental. We need to sanction people because that will then protect the child and therefore the group. Others say it's a function of defense mechanisms, right? If we're insecure ourselves, it's easier just to say, well, they're not doing it right because that's not the way I do it. So therefore we affirm our own right way of doing things by saying someone else isn't doing it right. Okay, and that helps us, makes us feel good. Sometimes we're just doing what's been done to us. We learn, well, my mother always did that, or well, that's how my father handled it. And so therefore, we feel that because that's what we learned and that's the way we've been doing it and others that we know have been doing it. And hey, we grew up being good kids. So if my mother did this to me and we grew up being good, certainly, that's the right way. And so therefore we go about in many ways being judgmental. Stress is the other reason. A lot of times we react, particularly with children, they do stress us out. Let's be real. Let's just be honest about it. They can be very stressful. And sometimes the judgment comes through stress. And one of the sort of continuums that you do have to be concerned with is stress and loss of control can lead to abuse if it's not put in check. And so the parent who just gets annoyed, if it's not contained and controlled and managed, can end up becoming the parent who abuses. And clearly that is, an abusive parent would certainly be on the rating scale of a bad mother or a bad father for that matter. So, a little bit into the history of that, in terms of our need really to survive and to ensure the survival of our species by making sure that our children do grow up well. So, there's this collective sense of, well, we need to be judgmental. We need to sanction people. We need to tell them they're not doing the right thing because on some level, we want that child to survive, to flourish, and thereby, if we go back in historical time, survive in terms of, the species moving on. Given that, what has happened in our society today, we have a new term, and I'm just going to read you a couple of them. It's called mommy shaming. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, mommy shaming. Really, it's bullying other mothers for their parenting choices. And we either do it in very subtle ways or maybe not so subtle ways. But in subtle ways, we're very aggressive. And there's been a lot of research on this because you might be mommy shaming without even realizing you're mommy shaming. Because a lot of what is being considered under mommy shaming is in many ways unintentional. It is in many ways people trying to be helpful in their way. Oftentimes grandparents want to be engaged with their children and their grandchildren. But in subtle ways, this mommy shaming still ends up becoming judgment. And so let me just read you a couple. There's a lot of research on it and a lot of discussion about it. One thing has to do with babies' milestones, right? How do we judge parents? Well, is the baby potty trained? Is the baby walking, crawling, speaking, right? Well, a simple statement like, aren't you worried she's not crawling yet? Is in some ways a criticism, a subtle one, an unintentional one, but one that parents are sensitive to. She's 3 and she's not potty trained, that kind of thing in some ways is also an inherent criticism. So in our rating system, if we see children not meeting milestones, we as the outsider are putting a judgment saying, not the best mother. She doesn't have them potty trained, talking, crawling, walking, that kind of thing. Whether a mother stays home or goes to work, another sore spot. A mother could be equally criticized for saying, I would miss my baby too much if I left her, or I'm so bored if I had to stay home all day. You can't win here. Do you see how difficult parenting is, right? For the people who stay home, it's like, oh, but you're sacrificing your career. For the people that are working, it's like, don't you feel bad leaving your baby all day? You see this dilemma, this ambiguity, but also the judgment inherent in that, and they've done a lot of research on parents who work, and it really is a matter of the relationship that you maintain. Not so much whether you're home or you're working. If you're a mother at home and you plop your kid in front of the TV or scream and yell at them all day, that is certainly not as good a context as a mother who works all day, but then comes home and spends quality time or takes quality efforts. And likewise, it can go the other way as well, too. You could work and ignore your child, or you could be home and be very attentive to the child. The point is, working or home isn't really the issue. It's the context. How is the child being treated in the time that you have? And so very, 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 very important. Other things we tend to do in judgment in our rating of parents is we oftentimes judge them based on our values and our choices, right? How many of you used a pacifier with your children? How many of you didn't? Okay. Probably equal numbers, although I can't see everybody. And I guess some of you are is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it going to hurt them? Is it going to help them? Does it calm them? Is it a crutch? Okay, so how should we rate a mother who gives a child a pacifier? They're a good mother or they're a bad mother? I don't know. You tell me. And what if a pacifier works with your first child, but it doesn't work for your second child, and they keep spitting it out and they don't want to have anything to do with it? And what about a pacifier that keeps falling on the ground and then the mother picks it up and wipes it? I mean, is that good? Is it bad? I don't know. Sometimes if you play in the dirt and have dirt, you end up with better immunity systems. Who knows? That's some thing that was going around, at least when I was a kid, you know? You see the point. Should we give them organic snacks? Here's one of my favorite. Should you let your kid drink soda and juice? Or should that be banned? Is that a good mother or a bad mother? Does denying kids things like that make them want it even more? So then you're a bad mother. Or does not giving it to them make you a good mother because that's sweet and it's junk and it's not nutritious and it's not going to be good for them? I don't know. You see the point of why Phyllis gave me a hard topic here, because really what is a good mother varies so much by the child, by the social context. It varies by whether it's a mother or a father, how we judge them. So many things. Questioning birth choice. Oh, she got an epidural. She couldn't handle it. Oh, she had natural the whole time. Oh my God. Well, she's going in for a pre-planned C-section. Is it good? Is it bad? Does it matter? And also how women spend their free time. Oh my God, she's a new mother. What is she doing in the gym exercising? So you can't, the point is, I can go on because there's many things, but I don't know about you, but I felt a little guilty when I was reading through this because I'm thinking, oh my God, I think I've said some of those things. We don't realize that in some ways they are inherent criticisms to the people on the other side. In fact, I just slipped this weekend because I have a niece whose daughter is over 3 now, and she isn't potty trained. And I said to her, oh, you're working on it? And after it, I thought, oh my God, what did you say? But I'm thinking 3, she should probably be potty trained. But that's my values and that's my thing. Not to say there's anything wrong with her child, for not being potty trained yet. Same thing with breastfeeding. Did you breastfeed? Oh my God, the baby's 4 and you're still breastfeeding? You can't win here. And so, when we look at, rating parents, it really is difficult. And it really goes back to the fact that parenting is just plain out tough. And I think all of us, myself included, we always live with that guilt. And we always say, if I just did this, or I should have done that, or maybe I was too harsh, or maybe, but the bottom line is we don't even know what the best standard is to be guilty about. We don't even know if what we did was something that we should feel guilty about or not, and sometimes we don't even know the impact we're having till later in life. I found that out with my own kids as well. I had my daughter and she saw somebody do something and she said to me, Ma, I'm so glad you raised me the way you did, because I know that I have to work for a living and I have to have my own ambition and I'm a woman and I have to be strong. And I thought, wow, where'd that come from? Because I had no idea. And I was in this guilt land thinking, I should have done this. I should have done that. I should have done this. And I think we all fall into that as well. But the truth of the matter is there really is no clear guidelines. So if you ask me to rate a mother, yeah, the ones that are really bad who murder their children, I think we can fairly say they rate poorly. But the rest is a shade of gray. What makes a good mother? Is it that their children are successful? Is it that their children are happy? Is it their children are healthy? What is it? And how do you get there? And that's the harder question. How do you get there? Because there really is no one path. And like I said, what works for one child may not work for another. So it's always a challenge. The one place, and I'll sort of wind down with this. I mean, I could just go on and on here, but the one place where we do rate mothers and where we do judge them comes to us in the courtroom. And in child protective services, social workers, and I know some of you maybe are social workers and maybe, have to make these judgments all the time. And it's a very difficult one because in many cases, their judgment, their rating of a mother in particular, or a family more broadly, can really lead to a child being taken away from their parents and put in foster care. And so the courts certainly have guidelines, but in many ways, what are the guidelines? I read this article for this talk. It's a really interesting one. It's from the University of Baltimore Law Review. And it's an attorney, Chris Gottlieb, and she wrote this article called Reflections on Judging Mothering. And what's really interesting about it is that she was a lawyer and she worked in the courts for family court and worked with a lot of families who were separated. And it wasn't until she had her own child and someone approached her on the subway to tell her that, she had a child in one of those, what do they call those things? Whatever they call them, you know what I'm talking about, carrier, but it's the one that strap around. And she was reading the newspaper and the baby was, I guess, looking toward the newspaper. And a woman approached her on the subway to tell her that looking at print 6 inches from one's face could cause eye strain. And the woman was worried that the baby's eyes were going to be damaged from that. And it gave her a like what kind of response? Saleswoman was worried that his arms were dangling. Okay. What's the point? She was in the courts all the time talking about, this is a good mother, this is a bad mother, this is a mother who should send her kids to foster care, this is a mother who shouldn't. And until she had her own child, she didn't realize, about being judged. And she argues that the list of things you can do wrong is long enough to make even the best intention and best resourced mothers feel inadequate. And she goes on in the article, and it's really talks about a no-win approach in judging parenting, and that these standards by which we judge are just impossible. And she really goes on to say that a lot of times we make judgments that really come out of our value system. If we go into a home and we're not used to seeing a home that's not, a more middle-class environment, right away it's a bad home. When we see parents who parent differently than what we would think is appropriate, it's a bad home. So she gives the example of, the classic example of a mother who needs to go to work and leaves the child unattended while she goes to work. Well, if she doesn't go to work, she doesn't make money. If she goes to work, she has to leave her child because she can't afford to pay for childcare because then it wouldn't pay to go to work. Is she a good mother if she leaves her child to go to work to provide food for her table, or is she a bad mother? And of course, the courts tend to move toward bad mother. Why? What she argues is that the courts are very sensitive and more likely to call someone a bad mother because they want to prevent the truly bad mothers. And it's safer to call someone a bad mother and have an action taken than let it go. And then the child ends up, unfortunately, abused or worse, neglected or dead. And so she says that even if we suspect neglect, very often we say bad mother. So it's a very interesting thing. And she argues that this idea of being bad isn't uniform across all groups in society. Particularly the poor are more often singled out and more often lose their child. And she really doesn't have an end per se, other than to say neglect is often put in the same category as abuse. And unfortunately, is it better for a child to work with a family and stay with the family or go to a foster care system? you know, again, another dilemma that's based on how we rate and how we judge mothers in particular. So, you know, I know years ago I used to work in, I used to work for CASA, and I used to teach them diversity training, and it was really important. And they were people who were child advocates, and it was really important for them to learn. And I did this whole thing on cultural sensitivity, class sensitivity, because very often when we judge parents or we judge a situation, we use our own values and we say, oh, I would never do that. Oh my God, how could she have done that? Whereas we really need to look at, and I guess this is the bottom line of the context, you know, what's the context within which the behavior we're seeing is happening? And if the context is, you know, sometimes can make something that seems not understandable, understandable if put within the context within which a behavior happens. What's the bottom line? Rating good mothers and bad mothers. Clearly, there are monster mothers who murder their children, and there's no question that they're bad in just everybody's pretty much sensibilities. But when it comes to knowing what a good mother is, I wish I can give you 10 points, and if you check them all, you're a good mother. But unfortunately, that's just not the reality. And just to close it out, you know, judgments really come from outside, people looking, you know, from our families in particular. I mean outside of us, from our families, from the others we interact with, and, you know, for good or for bad, we absorb that. You know, I hope this talk has just raised an issue rather than answered an issue. I don't know how you do rate parenting if we don't even know what good parenting is, and nobody seems to know. So I really can't answer that question, but I hope it raises issues of, you know, trying to think twice before saying things that could really amount to mommy shaming. And maybe for, you know, for some thought about, you know, how to support mothers rather than judge. You know, how can we help them become better? What kind of guidance can we give in a non-judgmental way? So anyway, I don't think I answered Phyllis's question, but I hope it was fun anyway. Thank you.
I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, really interesting.
Rosann,
very
you were
interesting.
fascinating.
Right.
I just have to tell you a funny story. When you're a young mother, you believe everything, you know, it was Dr. Spock at one point. And then I remember my best friend and I had read a book called Dr. Ganatz, who said, you're supposed to whisper when you would like your children to hear you and tell them, you don't yell at them. Well, we both tried it. Our kids didn't hear us. We have to have our voices.
And that's exactly my point, is even the experts aren't
Can you
sure what's going to
imagine
work.
whispering, "Will you take the dog out?" No, it wasn't deliberate. They didn't hear.
Exactly.
And we always laugh about, because why, I don't think the people of today even know who Dr. Ganat is, but we always laugh that he was an expert in telling someone else. He must have had a very low voice.
I mean, I understand his idea, but, you know, the practice of it is another story. You know, like, you know, it's the same thing. You know, if you're in a supermarket, well, let's reason with him. Let's tell the child to calm down. Sometimes they don't calm down. That's the bottom line. You got to just say stop. You know, I mean, you know, you just have to. So, you know.
And also when you judge, if you're judging yourself, because like I said, we were looking forward to this discussion, and my girlfriend and I said, okay, let's judge ourselves. And it's very interesting. We have to judge each other by the day. In other words, one day you could be a number 10 with all your kids, and the next day you don't know if you're a number 2, you know.
Yeah, and they go up and down your list too. Like
the evaluation
one is great
not,
today, and tomorrow it's like, oh, that kid, you know. And so they go up and down your scale of ranking as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of
so you just have to take it and make the best you can. Teach your children honesty and love and decency. That's, you know.
My mother always said, do your best and keep your fingers crossed. you know.
And what?
You can keep your fingers crossed. Just do your best and keep your fingers crossed. Hope for the best, because you can't control everything.
Yep.
And I think that's
Right.
part of it all, you know, and you just have to do your best at the moment that you find yourself.
That's the best advice.
And not judge yourself. You just say, you know what? You know, when he did that, I yelled at him. I did it. That's it. Move on. You know, you can't sit there and say, oh my God, I shouldn't have yelled. You know, you can and you do, and I've done it myself. But, I mean, I remember once my older son took a car key and went across my husband's car and made a big scratch. Yeah, it was a great thing he did. And I went out there, I'm like, what are you doing? And he turns around and he went into this philosophical thing about, if I knew it was wrong, I wouldn't have done it, but now I've learned something. On and on in this philosophical fashion. And I just stood there with my mouth open saying, let it go, Rosann, because, like my first response was yell at him. Are you crazy? Stop doing that. And then he went into this diatribe and I just was like, okay, maybe I screwed up here. It was a sign of things to come. But the point is that, your first reaction, my first reaction was to yell at him, and I don't know if he was too young to be too manipulative, or he just really said, oh, well, now I know I shouldn't do that. I don't know if it was innocent or manipulative, but either way, he ended up better for it and I stopped yelling. But my first response was to yell at him, stop, what are you doing? You're damaging the car, and, you can't go back and say, oh, I shouldn't have done that. No, I traumatized
And he's your
him.
son, the doctor, right?
The doctor, yeah.
The doctor. So you did a great job.
Well, I guess, but I mean, it's just that, my point in that little story is that, sometimes you just react and you can't sit there feeling guilty. You screamed at him, oh, I yelled at my son. Oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. And he did make amends for it. He did have his, he did make amends for it. I forgot what we made him do, but in my house, we always made them do something, like to make sure they understood that what they did was wrong.
Consequences.
So we gave them something, a project or something they had to do, like not a physical project, but like just, but you have to do this now because, you have to learn that that's not right. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it a little anyway. It was fun to see everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And you
Thank
made
you.
a
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
serious topic
You were marvelous as usual. And I thank you so much. There's so much room for discussion, believe me.
I have a few minutes. I have a meeting at 2:00. If anybody would like to say anything, feel free, but
Well, go ahead, Tracy.
No, Myra, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I have two sons who live far from on the West Coast, and they both have young children. And I find it so interesting. They call me for advice.
there you go.
and they remember how I just did what came naturally at the time, but it's just a very interesting slant on, because then I think about it and I really can't remember that far back, but one of my kids wrote something for a birthday, and he remembered me as as a mother, and I was astonished what he remembered.
Mhm.
And I never would have predicted and it was positive reinforcement that kind of shocked me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, and you obviously did something right if they want your advice. So it's a great story.
I don't know if you heard me, but you made a serious topic hilarious.
Oh, okay.
And thank you.
No problem.
Kind of along the same lines as what Myra was saying. Well, first, I think there's a real difference between I shouldn't say a real difference. There's a fine line between advice and criticism. And as we try to give advice, sometimes it can be taken as criticism, and the way it's delivered can be perceived as criticism versus advice. But keeping all that in mind, I think that since my children are adults now, I will probably wrestle with how to be a good grandparent. And, to what extent is that very different than being a good parent? And I'm not sure how we understand the consequences that the person who's being criticized actually endures as a result of that criticism. Does it really modify their behavior? Does it help them analyze what they're doing, more efficiently, more effectively? Do they just push it aside as, to stop meddling and being, like a crazy person? So
I
have
think
you
it's
seen?
all of the above, depending upon how it's given. And I totally agree with you. A lot of times advice in the research done from the University of Michigan, advice, particularly from grandparents, was perceived as criticism.
Mhm.
But I think it's if somebody's open to the advice, then it won't be perceived as such. I think there's a context there. But you're right. I'm not a grandparent yet, so I can't speak to that
Yeah, I'm
from
not even
direct
close.
experience anyway. So
Yeah, me either. And you know what? It's interesting
I'm
because
waiting.
I've actually told I've told my kids that they have to live near where my husband and I are, because we have to make sure that we raise their children right. And they laugh every time we say
Go. Good idea.
Oh, my gosh.
it's said in tongue in cheek, but to a certain extent we do want them to be wonderful, responsible, creative, influential parents, which we have no doubt that they will be. To be quite honest, we really don't doubt that they will be, but we need to be there to make sure.
There you go. I'm with you. I probably when I retire move once more, but I'm waiting to see where all my kids land, so I can strategically place myself.
There you go.
Yeah.
Mama
It's
Nonna.
interesting. It's interesting because when my daughter, 8 years ago, my daughter was moving from one apartment into her house that she was bought. And it was very early in the morning and the movers were coming and her cat wouldn't get into the carrier. And she called me at 6:30 in the morning because she didn't know what to do. She never called me for any problem, but at 6:30 in the morning, although she never asked for anything, an emergency, she called,
Yeah.
and I calmed her down and she just, but it's funny how kids do. They somehow return to you at some point.
I know I found that, and it's interesting now the conversations you have, because things like we felt guilty about years ago, or things you might have wished you didn't do, and
They don't remember.
they don't even remember, or they'll say, you know what, I understand, and now I understand because I'm older and I see it differently, and blah 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 blah. So that's why I hope the bottom line of this talk, and I guess I do have to get off soon, is just be kind to yourself. We all make the best decisions we can in a given moment in time. And, like my mother said, do your best and just keep your fingers crossed. And, it's, there was once, it was really interesting. There was a Little House on the Prairie show. My mother used to love that show. And in the one show, the mother faked her death just to see what her kids would say when she was dead. And, she ended up like really thrilled that they were saying things that she had hoped would be, but she didn't really know. And of course, they were mad at her in the end for like faking her funeral, which I don't recommend anybody do. But the fun part of it was you did get to hear them. And that's what they were saying is, oh, my mother, I wish I would have told her how much I appreciated the day she blah, 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 blah. And, it's, you never know your impact, and especially in mothering, because it is such a big impact. As fathering as well. I don't want to leave it. But anyway, I do have to go to another 2:00 meeting, so I have to unzoom and
I
rezoom.
love you. Have happy Mother's Day. Everyone
happy
should
Mother's
enjoy
Day.
that.
Best Mother's Day to all of you as well.
Of
Happy
course, I'm
Mother's
gonna
Day
bet you
to
in the fall.
everyone.
Happy Mother's Day. Yeah.
Yes.